cradled in the resort-laden Pocono Mountains, was known as Mauchunk and East Mauchunk. On February 9th, 1954, the body of American sports legend Jim Thorpe was laid to rest here. To honor his memory and his incredible achievements in the world of athletics, including his gold medals in the pentathlon and the decathlon at the 1912 Stockholm Olympics, the town was renamed Jim Thorpe. Today, his crypt and the town stand as monuments to the potential for great athletic achievements in all of us. Only 30 minutes east of here, but a world away, stands another monument to our potential, Pocono International Raceway. It's here that the best in all forms of motor racing come to prove themselves in the Speedway's 2.5-mile tri-oval. Today, it's the best GT drivers and machines of the International Motorsports Association who will try to prove themselves on a 2.8-mile road course, which incorporates turns 1 and 2 of the tri-oval. Hi, I'm Ed Bruce. The challenge of maneuvering these high-powered racing machines through Pocono's 7-turn road course for 500 kilometers should provide a stern test of these drivers' abilities. And to call the action for us today, as always, my partners Brock Yates and Steve Evans.
Thanks, Ed Bruce. You know, Pocono is an interesting place because it's known as a super speedway, but also it has an infield road course that's very, very slow. Here, for example, is a hairpin where the cars are only going to run about 40 or 50 miles an hour in first gear. But they also are going to run on the super speedway section where they'll run considerably quicker. My pal Steve Evans is out there to describe that part of the racetrack.
Well, Brock, to the NASCAR drivers and IndyCar drivers, this would be turn number 1. But to the road racers, this is the final turn here on the almost 3-mile Pocono circuit. It serves as the launch pad, really, for the long front straight towards the start-finish line. Now, 18-degree banking coupled with the ground effects of the GTP cars allow them to come through this part of the course just about flat out. What do the drivers themselves think of this track of contrast? We asked some of the best.
I don't know that I can speak for everybody, but maybe my opinion is an indication it's a pretty difficult racetrack, and I always look at it from the perspective of how to set a car up, and it's very difficult. The fact is that as a speedway, it's not really a speedway. You know, with 3 corners, all 3 of them being different, and the corner that we use on the racetrack is most similar to a speedway type race track in that it's a high bank. That's part of its fun. It's good fun, even in our kind of cars. But the infield is, and you know, maybe my point of view is slanted by the fact that I'm driving a turbo, but it's really much too tight. The switchbacks, the S's are not really S's. It's a straight line with, it's just a very narrow straight line. You can't pass. It's very easy to be pushed off the road. So it could be made into a real nice one without a whole lot of trouble.
Track's good. Well, I've always liked the fast track. You know, we can hold it flat in a bowl, and that's a big thrill. And it adds something. You know, you go to sleep a little bit on a road course until you can kind of get pumped up on something like that, and it keeps it, you know, very interesting for me.
Cyril, I would imagine that this track configuration is quite unique to a driver like yourself. You're not going to find anything quite like it in South Africa or on the continent.
No, we haven't seen any. We haven't got anything like this there. Although, of course, we've done Daytona and Charlotte, which is something similar. So, in a South African context, yes, it's unique, but we've done it before.
No problem adjusting to the Pocono then for you?
No, not really. In fact, we like it because it's more of a turbo track than most of the others.
Well, talking about the track is one thing. Right now, let's take a look at the racetrack through the front windshield of Joe Varde's powerful little Dodge Daytona.
Right, Steve, and Pocono, as you can see, is a large percentage of speedway, and it's a wild racetrack. In fact, set in the Pocono Mountains, it's not unusual for a deer once in a while to appear out on the main straightaway. But as we see, the #1 Dodge Daytona of Joe Varde heading down the long back straightaway, he's going to give us a fine look at this racetrack. Joe Varde from Tampa, Florida, a former RS Series champion. We won't see him racing here today, but Joe will give us a fine look at what this racetrack is all about. 2.8 miles as we see Joe accelerating out of a very wide pit here at Pocono. A big, wide racetrack and a lot of room for maneuvering, at least on the front straightaway. But as they approach turn 1, things tighten up considerably, as Joe observes.
As you come off the front straight, you've got to watch it because it's a high-speed right-hand turn. There's a lot of radius in that turn, and you need to set up just right for that because you're coming off at a high rate of speed. Then you're going to the hairpin turn. The hairpin turn you'd like to slow it down, so because it's off camber, you want to slow it down as fast as you can and go in as deep as you can, come out with a nice exit speed.
Now Joe is sliding through the narrow, twisty infield, heading toward turn 3.
You've got to go from the outside to the inside, drop a wheel off into the grass, and then exit all the way across to the other side of the turn. Okay, now we're going down the back chute, and we're going into another 180-degree turn, which heads back toward the banking. We take a left-hand turn from the outside of the track, drop the wheel off on the inside, and slide to the outside. We're going into this turn. We're exiting. We're putting it up against the guardrail as close to the wall as possible. Now we want to make sure our steering wheel is straight as possible so we can get the most forward speed that we can.
On this part of the Pocono racetrack, things widen out considerably, and the faster GTP cars will knock on 190 miles an hour as we see Joe Varde out on a long, open straightaway, heading down toward turn 7, where things get considerably more difficult.
You set the car in, and when you're going through the radius of that high-speed turn, the back end will start coming out a little bit. That determines on how much throttle you want to give the car to keep the back end in line. Okay, as you're exiting this turn, you want to lay in the gas pedal as hard as you can, put it up against the wall because that's where the dead air is, and that's where you want to be, and that's where you have the most speed, and we're heading toward the start-finish line.
There you have it, one lap at Pocono, and our thanks to Joe Varde for the tour of this 2.8-mile racetrack. Steve?
On the pole, Brock, for the Pocono Grand Prix will be the Chevy March car number 56, co-driven by Bill Whittington and Randy Lanier. In qualifying, with Whittington at the wheel, they averaged a speed over 123 miles an hour, an all-time track record for the road course here. And no surprise to regular IMSA fans, alongside Bill Whittington will be the 962 Porsche of Al Holbert and Derek Bell. Al Holbert is starting the race in car number 14.
Steve, in the second row, we have South African Cyril Vandermeer in a March Porsche, and Dale and Don Whittington in another March Chevrolet. They're brothers of pole sitter Bill Whittington.
Row 3 is the Jaguar team, with Brian Redman starting in car number 04. He'll be relieved by Hurley Haywood. Alongside him, the number 44 car with Doc Bundy starting. He is co-driving with team owner Bob Tullius.
Steve, we've got an Andretti in the field. It isn't Mario, it's his nephew, John Andretti, also from Nazareth, Pennsylvania, and a whole bunch of GTO and GTU automobiles in this 45-car starting field. There are smaller classes, but they're going to be having races within races in this event.
You're right, Brock. Victory as important to them as it is to the drivers of the faster GTP cars. And with this great difference in speeds, the GTP drivers find themselves in traffic early on.
They sure do, especially in the very tight infield section, which is only about 30% of this racetrack, but very difficult to pass in there, as we heard Al Holbert say earlier. Got a couple of interesting combinations up in the front row, Steve. We've got two Jaguars and two of those March Chevrolets of the Whittington brothers, and they could be big factors, especially in the race for the title against the Porsche 962 of Al Holbert.
So Randy Lanier very serious about maintaining that series points lead. He brought two cars here to Pocono, and we'll be back for 500 action-packed kilometers after this.
This special presentation of American Sports Cavalcade is being brought to you by B.F. Goodrich, makers of TA high-tech radials, and by Ford and your Ford dealer. Have you driven a Ford lately?
And Bill Whittington leads a field of GTP cars through turn 7 here at Pocono and down the long front straightaway, ready for a start. On the outside, Al Holbert in that turbocharged Porsche 962. And Steve, I'll bet you that Bill Whittington's going to hold the speed down at the last minute to use the torque of that big Chevrolet to out-accelerate Holbert into turn 1.
Absolutely. He'll hope to catch the Porsche with its boost down.
Turbo lag is a problem with a turbocharged car, and there it is. The green is out, and Bill Whittington, oh no, look at this, Steve. It looks like Holbert may have a jump on him.
Now, the Holbert Porsche is said to have the smallest turbo lag of any of the Porsche machines, and it shows right here. The big crowd on their feet as they are side by side through turn 1.
Boy, they sure are, Steve. And Whittington got snookered on the start, and now has lost the inside line as they head down into that very tight, very slow hairpin.
And as tight as that turn is, the Chevrolet on paper should enjoy an advantage there, but that didn't mean anything, does it, when Al Holbert's out in front of you wagging his tail at you?
Well, now they're down in that very tight infield section, and there's not much chance to pass in here, as everybody kind of just falls in line and follows Holbert down through that very, very tight part of the racetrack. But Whittington right on his tail. Let's see what kind of horsepower develops as they get out onto the big main straightaway.
And this is the kind of battle we've enjoyed watching in IMSA racing ever since Riverside, Brock. Al Holbert, Derek Bell versus Whittington and Lanier. And here they come, side by side down the straightaway. Wow.
A classic matchup. On the inside, 355 cubic inches of all-American Chevy horsepower versus 180 cubic inches of German turbocharged horsepower in that Porsche, Steve.
And you see them this close together, Brock, but the one thing you never know is how tightly down has Al Holbert screwed that boost now.
Sure has. As you can see, Bill Whittington dive underneath him in that very, very fast turn 7, but he just couldn't pull him down the front straight.
And just a car length or two behind Whittington, riding in third place, is the South African team. That is Cyril Vandermeer at the wheel here in the opening laps.
So Holbert leads lap number 1, and two interesting lines down into turn 1, Steve. Holbert down, tucked in close to the inside rail, and Whittington way up wide, but he couldn't close the distance as they scramble through that very slow hairpin in the infield.
Well, Whittington is such an aggressive driver, Brock, but in this section of the course, he's just got to be cool, not make any mistakes, and wait for the straightaway.
Well, he really doesn't have any choice in here because there's no opportunity to pass, and he's going to have to sit there. But the problem is, I think, as you noticed on the first lap, Steve, once they did get out onto the long straightaway, Holbert tended to pull him real good. So maybe there's a, oh, look at this. Whittington tried to tuck underneath Holbert coming off onto the straight, but it didn't work.
Well, it's not quite a drag race this time, Brock, but we'll see again if Al Holbert has a horsepower edge as they accelerate up towards near 190 miles an hour.
Well, as you said, Steve, there's an adjustable boost control on the 962 as we see Cyril Vandermeer running in third place. That, too, is a Porsche powered car, but not factory supported like the 962 of Holbert, which, as I said, probably can get maybe 800 horsepower in short bursts because of that turbocharger.
But the harder you screw down the boost, Brock, the more fuel you're going to use. In a race of this distance, pit stops could be the difference, and fuel economy is awfully important.
Absolutely. As Brian Redman back there in that 04 Jaguar begins to challenge Kemper Miller in the number 25 March Chevrolet. That's a car very similar to the one being driven by Bill Whittington as they run through that very quick 18-degree turn 7. And look at this. It looks like Brian Redman's going to take him on the outside.
Well, Brock, Kemper Miller must have had an incredible start because he was a couple of rows behind the Jaguars, who were side by side in row number 3. But the 12-cylinder, normally aspirated Jaguar machine comes right around him now.
Sure did. Those are beautifully prepared cars being run out of Alexandria, Virginia by the Bob Tullius Racing Organization, Group 44. Doc Bundy back there. He's co-driving with car owner Tullius. And Hurley Haywood, the former Le Mans winner, is running with Brian Redman there. One of the finest race drivers in the world. Run all kinds of automobiles, and not only is he a great race driver, but he's a great guy as well.
And good to have him back, Brock, after a very short retirement. Brian now a permanent resident of Jacksonville, Florida,
where he does a driving business in classic and exotic cars when he's not racing for Jaguar. As we see him head through that final turn on the infield course and head on out of this back straightaway here at Pocono.
I talked about fuel economy earlier, Brock. The Jaguars may be the most fuel-efficient machines in this race. And while the Chevy Marches and the Porsches are pitting, they hope to be out there putting some distance on them because of that good economy.
Very, very much the case with these automobiles. Also, one of the most beautiful racing cars I think ever made. They're designed by an American, Lee Dykstra, carrying Jaguar V12 engine, as you said, and sponsored and owned by the Jaguar people. And very, very proud of them they are, and they ought to be, because they are beautifully prepared race cars.
And Brock, I'd just like to have the money the film is worth if the fans burn up all weekend long taking pictures of those Jaguars in the pits.
No question about it. One of the most photographed race cars in the world. As we see the number 15 March Chevrolet of John Kalajian. He's up in 5th place. He, too, jumped by the Jaguars at the start, Steve, along with Kemper Miller. But it looks like right now, maybe Brian Redman's going to try to make that up. He's reeling in John at a fairly regular rate right now as we see him run through that very tight little infield course.
Well, as we saw at Elkhart Lake earlier this year, the Jaguars have been plagued with early lap crashes, Brock, and I think both drivers were just trying to stay out of trouble and get settled down. John Kalajian running 5th. He's from Folly Beach, South Carolina.
a driver that you don't hear too much about, but is capable of putting up some very quick laps. John is not one of the real veterans in this kind of racing and is still kind of finding his way around the racetrack in the big horsepower cars, and I think we're going to hear more about him as this IMSA GTP kind of racing grows and grows, which it has been over the last few years. And there he is, your leader, Al Holbert, coming down the front straightaway and diving into turn 1, and he'll start to run into the slower traffic, Steve, and that could give Bill Whittington an opportunity to catch up a little bit.
Especially in this part of the course, Brock, as they come into the hairpin. Whittington ought to be able to just suck right up behind that 962. Leading it is Al Holbert, the incredible Porsche car number 14. Bill Whittington is in the seat of number 56. Later, we'll see series leader Randy Lanier driving. The South Africa is having a good effort so far in the third slot.
For Long Pond, Pennsylvania, for more Pocono Grand Prix action, I'm Brock Yates, along with Steve Evans and Ed Bruce, as we watch a pair of Jaguars try to gather in John Kalajian in that lone March Chevrolet. Steve Evans.
The Jaguars doing some formation flying here, Brock. That is Doc Bundy on the inside, car number 44, pulling right up behind the Chevy March of John Kalajian. Now, Kalajian jumped the Jaguars at the start, but they're getting revenge right now. Brian Redman right behind his teammate Bundy.
He sure is, as they now downshift down into first gear to squeeze around that very tight left-hander they call the hairpin, heading down onto the infield part of this racetrack, where it will be to the advantage of Kalajian, I would think, with a bigger torque Chevrolet. He should be able to hold off those two Jaguars, although it could be a different case entirely when they get out onto that long back straightaway.
Indeed, the high-winding 12-cylinder English-built machines are very tough down the straightaway. This Chevy March of Kalajian's doesn't have quite the power we see in the Whittington Lanier car.
No, it's not quite as strong a car, but John, as we said earlier, is coming on very well. He's been around sports car racing for a long, long time in smaller classes, but this is his first opportunity the last couple of seasons to run the big GT prototypes.
And here is the perfect opportunity for Doc Bundy to reel in John Kalajian. Pulls up right behind him, tucks in, and now he's going to get him on the outside, Brock.
Well, that's a very tricky move because turn 7 is about 170 miles an hour. That's an 18-degree bank right-hander, and it takes a lot of hard driving to get through that thing the way Bundy has high up on the outside. But look at this, Steve. Kalajian showing some smoke.
And apparently the power goes away on Kalajian's car as Bundy easily takes him going into turn number 1. And now it's Brian Redman's turn to pick on the ailing Kalajian.
Well, you wonder what kind of a problem was in Kalajian's car. He showed a burst of smoke coming off at turn 7, but now it seemed to have gone away. I wonder whether that was a surge of oil somewhere in the engine, Steve, that has corrected itself. Now he seems to be running all right.
Well, whatever the problem was, Doc Bundy and Brian Redman took full advantage of it, as the Jaguars are now running 5th and 6th with Kalajian back in 7th.
And behind him in that blue and white March is John Paul Jr., and he's going to challenge Kalajian as well.
So poor John Kalajian, who had such a terrific start, in fact got ahead of 2 full rows of automobiles on that first lap, is now paying the price.
Well, it could be that it's just a question of raw horsepower, Steve. When they get out on this long back straightaway, it just may be that John's car doesn't have quite as many beans as the rest of the guys, as now he's going to be challenged by John Paul Jr. in that blue and white March Chevrolet. As you well know, John Paul Jr. is one of the most talented young prospects in all of racing.
In fact, Brocky won the IMSA title a few years ago in a Porsche, had hoped to this year concentrate on kart cars, Indianapolis-style racing, but the team he was driving for had some problems, elected to park the car. John is still on the payroll, Brock. He's getting paid to drive kart cars even though he doesn't have a ride, but likes to keep his hand into this and visits the IMSA circuit occasionally, and everybody glad to have him back.
They sure are. As we see the 4th and 5th place automobiles, that is Dale Whittington, Bill's younger brother, in the other Blue Thunder March Chevrolet, being followed now by Doc Bundy in that number 44 Jaguar. So those two automobiles, two totally different kind of cars, but remember though, one is a V12, one's a V8, but both are naturally aspirated. Young Dale Whittington, what a driving family these three are. He today is teamed up with senior brother Don. Bill is the middle brother, and kind of the star of the family at this particular point. Dale and Don don't drive quite as much as Bill, if you can keep track of that, but all of them, when they get behind the wheel, stand on the gas.
As does this man, Doc Bundy. He's well acquainted with the Whittington brothers, as he was their chief driving instructor at the racetrack they owned, Road Atlanta.
What a way to stay in shape, right? On your own racetrack as we watch Doc Bundy now challenge Dale Whittington down the front straightaway, and there he goes. He ducks inside Dale and takes over 4th place as he squeezes through some slower cars on the inside as well. So Doc Bundy, a good, strong move by that Jaguar down the front straightaway, Steve.
Well, so far, Bob Julius and team have got to be pleased with the Jaguars' performance. Their battle plan was not to go out and try to lead this thing. They know they don't have the raw power of the Whittington car or the Al Holbert car. But as I mentioned earlier, they do have fuel economy, and they hope that'll help them in this long race.
And reliability as well, Steve. They've had some unfortunate crashes, as you said earlier, during the season, but when these cars run, they keep on running, as does this automobile, the number 14962, being driven by your current leader, Al Holbert. By the way, Steve, Al's father, Bob Holbert, is a familiar name in racing, was one of the great drivers in the post-war renaissance of sports car racing in the United States. A Porsche driver as well, just like his son.
And finished up his career on the famed Cobra team of Carroll Shelby, right?
Exactly. A fine race driver, and often comes to the races to help his son out in the pits. I don't think he's here today, though.
In his first appearance at Indianapolis, the 500 this year, Al Holbert was a serious candidate for Rookie of the Year, a strong finish.
Run stock cars, has run sports cars, and of course trying his hand now at Indianapolis racing. A very, very accomplished race driver. A very quiet man on and off the racetrack. Not quite as spectacular as some of the other guys that you might see, but boy, does he do a good job in anything he tries to race.
While we were watching Al Holbert, Brian Redman in the 04 Jaguar got around Dale Whittington for the 5th position. Whittington now wants it back. Starts to try him on the inside, then ducks back in. Maybe the outside is the way to go. As they go into turn 1, he may be able to use this slower traffic, Brock, to his advantage here.
Well, he tries him on the outside. Brian Redman had the inside line, but he gets bogged by the number 5962 of Bob Aiken, running back in 11th place. That car with a smaller 2.8-liter engine is not as fast as the 962 leading the race, although they look identical, as now Dale Whittington really put some distance on Brian Redman. That little scramble there down into turn 2 and that tight hairpin really mixed things up and gave Dale Whittington a real break.
That was an intelligent race car driving on the part of the youngest of the Whittington brothers, using that traffic as he did. Beautiful.
It sure was. He kind of made a move down on the inside with down the front straightaway, saw that way might be blocked and tried the outside and made it work.
Well, the infield turns are certainly the test of handling here at Pocono. Here's the test of horsepower, the long back straightaway, Brock.
It sure is. This is such a weird kind of a racetrack in that about, as I said earlier, about 70% of it is just raw, flat-out straightaway, and the other 30% is just about as tight a stretch of racetrack as you'll see in any road course in the United States.
And, Brock, the banking here at Pocono is something these drivers are not used to, except for Daytona, of course. When you've got 18 degrees of bank, you've got more tire wear on that outside. Huh?
Well, it's a chassis setup that demands a lot of compromises. We heard Al Holbert talk about that earlier. You got to set the car up for that very fast, almost flat-out right-hander at the in the middle of the straightaway, and also get set up for this really tight little stuff down in here.
Now, Brian Redman has got a payback here on Dale Whittington, possibly, Brock. He's got Whittington now boxed in behind that same red 962, the car of Bob Aiken.
Wow, look at that. Brian Redman just spiked the brakes and ducked underneath him on the inside in that first gear left-hander called a hairpin. So now he got it back. A good piece of driving by Brian Redman that basically puts the same move on Dale that Dale put on him a lap earlier.
And in the meantime, John Paul Jr., car number 45, stays in the 7th position.
So Dale Whittington now chasing Brian Redman as we watch the 3rd place automobile, Sarah Vandermeer. He's been kind of staying out of trouble all day long and kind of riding alone there in that 3rd spot, but holding on to it nonetheless. That automobile, as we said, is kind of a hybrid car. An English chassis, a German engine, a South African driver. Boy, what a combination. But I'll tell you what, they won some races as we watch Sarah Vandermeer heading into the pits for what I'm sure is going to be the first of his routine pit stops here at Pocono.
Well, this pit stop may be coming a little earlier than the crew expected, Brock. I think they hope to stay out there a few more laps than this.
Well, you may be right, Steve, but it's possible, too, that Cyril had to use that old boost knob a little bit more than he wanted to just to stay up with those leaders who are really running hard. There's his co-driver, Tony Martin. It looks like he, was going to get in to relieve Cyril, but Cyril said, just stand by, Tony, and relax. Why don't you clean the windshield a little bit? Keep busy. I'll call you when I need you as the crew continues to change the left side tires. But this man, Doc Bundy, could catch up and take over 3rd place. if Cyril doesn't get out of the pits in time. So there's a big opportunity for Doc Bundy right now as the pit stop is about over for Cyril Vandermeer, Steve.
Well, Tony Martin latches the door down on the Porsche March. The crew, however, not quite completed with their work. And Cyril Vandermeer, you can see the tension a little bit in his face there, Brock. He wants out of that pit area. He came in before anybody else, and that's not good to begin with.
And here's some more bad news, Steve. Doc Bundy has just gone by to take over third place as the crew finally gets their work done and Vandermeer gets underway. The problem here at Pocono is in this kind of pits that he's got a very slow course back through the infield before he can get up to full speed. And here's another pit stop.
Well, Brock, Dale Whittington, who was running 7th, has brought the 57 car into the pits. His brother Don has now been strapped in, the door slammed shut, and they will re-enter the fray. But apparently the car not yet moving. The engine a little blocky. In fact, it does not want to start under its own power, so the crew is going to have to bump start it. How humiliating. A $200,000 race car that can't even self-start. But the guys putting their backs into it. Don Whittington brings the Chevrolet engine to life, and out onto the racetrack Don goes. And this is his first time at the wheel today here in the Pocono Grand Prix. His younger brother doing a fine job of keeping that car in contention. So now it's Don's turn to go out and try to pick up a few positions more. So a good pit stop kept Don Whittington in that 7th spot. Brock Yates is down in the pits with Dale.
Okay, with Dale Whittington, it just gave up to his brother Don after a good, strong run. Dale, you were having a pretty good battle with Brian Redman and the Jaguar for a while.
That was the very best race I've had in a while. I was laying back to save the tires, the brakes, and conserve fuel. We came in a little quicker than I thought. Don will finish the race, and we should have a good one.
Looking car running strong?
Yeah, I like that pass I put on him. Then he got me back. That was good, though.
I had a feeling watching that, Brock, that the youngster Whittington was having a good time dueling with the master of world endurance racing, Brian Redman, and obviously he was. Having a very good time is Al Holbert, who's got a big lead in the Porsche 962, car number 14, over the Whittington Lanier team. The Jaguar now up into 3rd spot, captained right now by Doc Bundy. The other Jaguar in the 4th position, the South African Porsche March in 5th.
More pit stop action here at the Pocono Grand Prix as John Paul Jr. brings his March Chevrolet in for relief. And taking over for him is his co-driver, John Morton, El Segundo, California, a real veteran of all kinds of sports car racing, tries his hand periodically at Indy cars as well. Riding in 6th place as he heads down into turn 1, trying to accelerate that automobile up to speed. It's going to take him almost a full lap before he gets out onto the long back straightaway as we watch the current leader, Al Holbert, in that 962 Porsche. Established a lead right off the starting line and has not given it up so far. But he's going to have to make a pit stop. He's going to have to give up to a relief driver, and he's one of the best in the business, Derek Bell. Steve is with him.
Derek, with only 2 planned pit stops, it's difficult really for the drivers to get equal amount of time in the car. What's the plan with the Holbert team?
Well, Al's done a great job in the first hour, and I hope I can keep up the good work, and I'll probably stay until the end.
And if you should get tired, Al's always there to relieve you.
Yes, that's right, he is. I hope we don't need him.
He should be coming in soon.
Yeah, in about 4 laps, I guess.
Good luck.
Thank you.
A very poised veteran of endurance car racing, Derek Bell, along with his co-driver, Al Holbert, 2 of the real professionals in this kind of racing, as Holbert essentially unchallenged for the lead, running along very smoothly, just trying to stay out of trouble. And now let's go to Ed Bruce, who's found himself a quiet place and a special guest.
Thank you, Brock, and I'm sure you'll recognize this gentleman, a man that I've had the pleasure of talking to on several occasions in the past. This is John Bishop, president of the International Motorsports Association. John, Pocono has quite a history, and it's got some special significance for you, doesn't it?
Well, it certainly does, Ed. We were, when we started IMSA back in 1969, we had to get our series off the ground, and this is the first race course where IMSA ever sanctioned a race. And and it was very small potatoes, and we had 382 spectators, and I think we lost about $30,000 on the race. And so coming back, we promoted our own in those days.
IMSA's come a long way since then.
Yeah, I'll say. And of course, the cars were different, and the track was different then. But
how many cars ran?
We started, I think, about 23 cars on the small oval here, the 5/8 mile oval. And we did like a miniature of the Indianapolis race, only with Formula Fords. And we did it for 200 miles, and it was a great race. Fantastic race, nobody came.
Thank you, John. Let's go back to more racing at the Speedway.
Well, thousands of people have come today, John Bishop, to see this man, Al Holbert, lead the Pocono Grand Prix every lap so far. But sooner or later, he's going to have to bring that car into the pit area. Derek Bell said a while back it'd be 4 laps, and it has been 4 laps, and sure enough, here comes Holbert into the pits, Brock.
And this could mean a lead change as well, Steve, because he's going to have to make a driver change and probably take on fuel and change tires, and it's very possible that he'll give it up to the Whittington-Lanier cars. We see Derek Bell ready to climb aboard, and here comes the Whittington-Lanier March Chevrolet, and that should give them the lead as the clock ticks away in the Bell-Holbert pits. Al Holbert helping Derek Bell get hooked up, and that takes quite a bit of time, Steve.
It sure can, Brock. You've got the radio connection to make, sometimes in hot weather, a cool suit or a cool hat. But they get it done very quickly. They've done it many times before. The crew, as you said, installing new rubber. And this